Stories that time forgot.
Imagine stepping into the spiritual heart of the world, only to discover that behind the marble walls and the scent of incense, the printing presses aren't just churning out prayers. They're cranking out bills that would make the Federal Reserve itself shudder. The Vatican's counterfeit money factory. Vatican City, Rome, 1972. What you're about to uncover in the next few minutes isn't just some hallway theory. It's the chronicle of how the oldest institution in the West became entangled in a systemic forgery scheme that defied Interpol and secret services across half the planet. Stick around until the end, because what you'll learn today will forever change how you view the engineering of deception and grand fraud section of this channel, revealing that where there is blind faith, there is often a trail of the dirtiest money you can imagine. Imagine you're there, walking through St. Peter's Square under a scorching sun that makes the air smell like hot asphalt and the ancient moisture of the fountains. You're wearing a black cassock that sticks to your back with sweat, carrying a briefcase that weighs far more than its size suggests. You aren't carrying relics or sacred documents, but printing plates of mathematical precision, engraved with the faces of foreign leaders and seals that should only exist in national mints. Have you ever wondered how the smallest state in the world, surrounded by impenetrable walls, became the perfect hideout for an industrial-scale counterfeiting ring? The answer doesn't lie in the naves of the basilicas, but in the forgotten basements of the Institute for the Works of Religion, where the roar of the presses was drowned out by the Gregorian chants echoing on the floors above. As we've already discovered in other cases from the engineering of deception and grand fraud section. Here on Stories Time Forgot, ambition knows no bounds, and the Vatican's status of absolute sovereignty was the perfect shield for this operation. A group of unscrupulous financiers, linked to the propaganda du Masonic Lodge and the Holy See's own financial administration, realized that no one would dare search a truck with the Pope's diplomatic plates. They found that the greatest fraud wasn't committed with cheap tricks, but with the very infrastructure of religious power. Every bill that rolled off those presses was a masterpiece of deception, printed on paper with the exact watermark and inks that only the international financial messaging system of the time considered legitimate. As you investigate alongside the Italian police officers who were starting to notice a flood of perfect dollars in the Milan markets, you realize the system was designed so that any trail would vanish into a bureaucratic black hole. The atmosphere in the Vatican Bank offices turns ice cold when outside inspectors mention the word audit. The scent of candle wax and old wood now seems to mask the chemical stench of the solvents used to clean the steel plates. The protagonist of this historical shadow is an archbishop with an innate talent for dark finance, a man who preferred the shine of gold over that of stained glass. The first act of this financial tragedy ends when an anonymous informant drops a bag of unnumbered bills at a journalist's doorstep, revealing that the factory was operating at full capacity while the world looked the other way. But what comes next is even darker, because you'll discover this money weren't for luxury. It was to fund silent wars against communism in Eastern Europe. How would you react if you knew the alms you drop into the collection box ended up mixed with millions of bills created in a clandestine print shop to buy political influence? The second act takes us on a chase through the labyrinthine corridors of Vatican City. Undercover agents must act with extreme caution, as one false move could cause a diplomatic incident of biblical proportions. They start noticing that supply delivery trucks enter empty and leave with a suspension that seems to be carrying tons. The sensory atmosphere becomes stifling. It's the contrast between the celestial peace of the gardens and the electric tension of the vaults where the secrets are kept. At this point in the story, the suspense is absolute. Investigators discover that the counterfeiting ring had the silent support of the Union Bank of Switzerland to launder these assets and turn them into legal tender before authorities could trace the origin of the plates. The paradox is that the very holiness of the place was the primary ingredient of the scam. This technique of using untouchable institutions to move illicit funds is the same one we'll see in our next episode when we analyze the loan that was never repaid, proving that impunity is the great swindler's best ally. The third act is the moment the facade collapses. On a moonless night in 1973, a suspicious fire in one of the administrative buildings attempts to erase the evidence before the Securities and Exchange Commission can intervene. The sound of Roman fire sirens breaks the deathly silence of the city-state. Partially burned documents flying through the air contain proof that over $1 billion counterfeit dollars had been manufactured. The next day, financial panic blends with moral scandal. Bank executives linked to the case disappear or are found dead under strange circumstances. As if the hand of God, or perhaps the mafia, had decided to settle the accounts once and for all. However, the end of this story leaves a bitter taste for justice. Although the money factory was dismantled and the names of those involved came to light in Interpol reports, most of the high-ranking officials never saw the inside of a cell thanks to diplomatic immunity. The fake money continued to circulate for years, diluted into the global economy like an undetectable virus. The Vatican had to deeply reform its financial institutions under pressure from the International Monetary Fund, but the memory of those printing machines running in the shadows remains a stain that time hasn't been able to wash away. They managed to prove that even in the holiest of places, paper currency has the power to corrupt. And he will. Before we finish, I have to tell you that the next case we'll unearth in this engineering of deception and grand fraud section is just as shocking. It's the loan that was never repaid, where we LLC how an entire nation was tricked into funding a project that only existed in the minds of ruthless bankers. You can miss it if you want to understand how credit can be the heaviest chain of all. Now that you know the story of the printing press that challenged economic reality from the heart of the church, I ask you, do you think institutions with centuries of history deserve automatic trust? Or should we subject their accounts to the same scrutiny as any modern company to prevent these financial miracles from happening again? Leave me your thoughts in the comments because your perspective is essential to completing this historical puzzle. Subscribe so the system notifies you when we dig up the next piece of the puzzle and stories time forgot. Your support is what allows us to keep investigating these truths that power tried to erase forever. See you in the next section.